Welcome to Dive into World Building. This is a little bit of an experiment, but we have spent about an hour setting it up, and I have to tell you that Kimberly Unger is amazing because this is why we have this very official looking setup behind me, and you can see me twice. But so here I am. I'm at a BayCon convention, and so far we have 2 people in the audience, including Kimberly and one other person whom I know, but that's cool. I'm glad you're here, and what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the theme of BayCon, which is dystopias and utopias. And just a few times over the course of the weekend, as you might imagine, but it's actually a really interesting topic. And there are a few things that I've sort of been storing up that I haven't talked about yet. So yeah, so dystopias, we're really familiar with the idea of dystopias from what everybody calls dystopian fiction, and that includes the Hunger Games. It includes a bunch of things. And yesterday I was talking about dystopian space opera, so people were talking about ancillary justice as a dystopia. There are lots of dystopias. It was very interesting because in a discussion I was having yesterday, somebody was talking about whether post-apocalyptic scenarios where everyone was miserable were actually dystopias. And by that argument, when I think of dystopia, I usually think of societies that are oppressive in fiction. And so I'm not sure, you know, I mean, when the forces that are causing misery are external, like simply lack of resources, of course, lack of resources creates internal societal stress and that sort of thing. So do you guys have thoughts on whether post-apocalyptic scenarios count as dystopias in your concept?
I've seen them labeled sort of as such, because it's sort of, you end up with like dystopia / post-apocalyptic.
Well, so misery, I guess, is a common thread, right?
Pretty much, yeah. I think a lot of post-apocalyptic is sort of almost the complete and total lack of a government, where, you know, it's like Mad Max, where everything's just broken up into like warring gangs, riding across wastelands.
I think, in fact, oppressive government is one of those things that I associate with dystopia. When I think of things like, or an oppressive empire, a la ancillary justice. But there's also 1984, which is definitely dystopian, and I suppose Blade Runner is dystopian as well.
I think one of the questions that we need to ask when we're talking about utopia and dystopia is, for whom?
Yeah, well, exactly.
Because The Handmaid's Tale is a dystopia if you're a woman. It may not be a dystopia if you're a white Christian male.
No, I think that's right. In fact, in our discussion yesterday of the space operas, we did get a little bit into that question, which was, you know, who's being oppressed, and people will characterize something as a utopia, but only thinking about who ostensibly count, right? So who counts is actually a really important question for figuring out what a dystopia is, because in fact, one of the things that came up in our discussion yesterday was, you know, people were making jokes about how, well, you know, if you wait for 20 minutes, we'll be in a dystopia. And I said, wait a minute, you know, for a lot of people, we already are in a dystopia.
Yeah.
Right? You have to be in a very particular kind of group of people not to be already in a dystopia. So, so, you know, the question of why are dystopias so interesting came up, and I said, well, I mean, that seems to me to be kind of obvious, which is there are a lot of elements of dystopia going on in our lives right now, right? Then you'd want to examine that, and you would want to say, hey, you know, how can we think about dystopias in such a way that it will be helpful for our current thinking about our daily lives and our political position in the world, et cetera, et cetera. I said I wasn't going to take notes, but you know what? I
Can't stand it.
And I thought, you know what? I should really write up this hangout in some way, shape, or form. So I'm gonna do my best. So if I pause for a second, I'm gonna be taking my notes. So.
Well, I'm curious because Dystopia gets so much more airtime than Utopias.
Yes. Currently, yes, it does.
Yeah, because we always assume, well, it's a utopia, everything is great, there's not going to be any problems. Where's the story? So that's a good question. I think like one of the sort of utopia-ish ones maybe is Star Trek.
I think Star Trek is intended to be Utopia. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's like literally the only thing I can think of.
But it's a pretty major one.
Like, what?
It's a pretty major one.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I think the Star Trek as Utopia was actually interesting because it was in response to dystopian events of the time in which it was created. And so, in fact, I've often heard in online discussions and sometimes in live discussions at conventions and such, the question of, well, do we need to have, we've had so many fictional dystopias now, do we need to have more people writing utopias in order to give us something to look forward to, so we're not just all depressed and hiding in holes in our rooms and stuff like that. We have a comment from the peanut gallery.
You can just talk into the microphone. That's probably better. So, and of course, with Star Trek, they also look at dystopian worlds, even though it in itself is a utopia. Yes.
Yes. And there's a contrast set up between the worlds that they visit that have dystopias and then their own utopia. Of course, there are always problems in utopia, right? It's pretty clear to me.
Yeah, okay. The Demolition Man movie was also set in a utopia, and you kind of have to. I did not know it was ever a book, or like before it was a book. I've only seen the movie. But it was where it's like crime has been solved, everybody's healthy, everybody's happy, people listen to commercials, and there's no crime. And then you see like there is sort of this underground. Led by a very funny Dennis Leary, who's advocating for like, I want to get drunk and die of a heart attack eating meat, and they won't let me, and this is ridiculous. But
yeah,
it's a good movie. It's a funny movie.
I think one of the things that might be interesting to tackle in the case of utopias is the question of how they get maintained. I'm getting a little bit of an echo. One sec. Yeah, so how do utopias maintain themselves, I think, is an interesting question. I think there's also another really interesting question about utopias. Not just how they maintain themselves, but who imagines them and how are they conceptualized, and constitutes a utopia. And that's obviously something that people have taken on over the years, because there's lots and lots and lots of literature on that. But I wanted actually to mention Esperanto, because Esperanto was sort of designed to be a language that would bring about human unity and utopia. Right? And it was trying to say, well, we're going to use all of these elements of language that are common to many, many languages, and by using this method, we strip away all of the divisions, I guess, and yeah, so there's this really interesting tension in the concept of utopia between between sameness and lack of conflict, right? I mean, because sameness requires a lot of conflict potentially to maintain. This is one of the things that actually brings about utopia, brings about dystopias. When people try to create utopias, they're not able to accommodate all of the differences that people have.
Yeah, The Giver is basically the really good example of that.
Tell us more.
Oh, in The Giver, it starts out, and the film itself starts out in black and white. And they've leached out the color, they've leached out everything that makes people individuals in order to create what they think is a utopia. And it turns out to be quite dystopic, and then the person escapes, of course.
Right.
The book had a lot more detail on things.
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Well, I actually, you know what that makes me think of is A Wrinkle in Time.
Yeah.
And the question of Camazotz, where it reigned supreme and made sure that everybody was exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
So commonality is definitely valuable, right? And a sense of common identity is I think crucial to a utopia if you're going to have one. But at the same time, sameness is not the goal.
Well, if you go back to the term when it was coined, utopia was no place. There is no such place. And I think that concept is the idea that there really is no such thing is something that has fallen away from the original story, which I haven't read, and I don't know how many people even remember that there is a book about a place that was supposed to be an ideal society, and is called No Place.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think there's also there's a bunch of levels to this. I think in the West we've had this idea that okay, sameness is great as long as it's our sameness.
Mm-hmm.
And there are strict rules about that. There's also the idea that we haven't touched on yet, which is the male version of what a feminist utopia looks like. Because I hear them saying, well, it's where we've killed all the men and we've enslaved them and blah, blah, blah. You know what? I've read a lot of utopias by a lot of women, and none of them look like that.
That's right.
Tempting sometimes, but still not a utopia.
Yes. But I think it underscores sort of we don't have a really good idea of what a blended, multi-ethnic, positive society would look like, because we've never done it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I would disagree in terms of never done it. Certain parts of the Caribbean, you can get an idea of what it's like, because the racism is almost non-existent, and everyone if everyone goes back 2 generations, there's a different race in the family ancestry. So in terms of people blending in and it becoming a true melting pot, as opposed to people staying in different corners of the city, little pockets, and having their own little space, as opposed to truly melding in. You can look to certain non-Western societies for an example. And I would point to Trinidad in terms of that kind of sociological standpoint. I would look to Trinidad for that kind of idea of what something that people recognize in utopias happens there. So anyway, not to hijack the conversation, but
No. Okay, so we have now a large list of things appearing in my chat bar, including Lois Lowry's The Giver and the Borg from Star Trek, which are definitely uniformity in a really, really bad way, but definitely an interesting into the discussion. Erewhon, Larry's providing Erewhon as an example. Thomas More's Utopia. Yeah, so
Did
there
anyone
are
mention
lots.
Herland? Did anyone mention Herland?
Herland. No. And the other one I'm
That
thinking
is
of,
Charlotte Perkins Gilman, long, long time ago.
okay. The other one I'm thinking of is actually Everfair. Nisi Shaw, Everfair, where people are trying to start, it's a very new book, trying to start a utopia after they've taken some land from the Belgian king, and they try to start a utopia in essentially what was at that time Belgian Congo, and it's kind of steampunky, and it's so that's another one that might be really interesting.
Yeah, I need to read that. Nisi is here right now. Not with me, but at this con.
Yes, I had the sense that she
which
was over.
con is that? WisCon?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Kate at WisCon.
Okay. Tell her hi. Give her a hug for me.
Okay, I will.
All right.
Okay, so we've got a suggestion over here, Handmaid's Tale, which of course we have to mention as one of the ultimate dystopias, more like our current society at the moment.
There have been a couple of real-world attempts at building utopias where someone has purchased a block of land down in South America and tried to bring people in on an investment basis and build these little micro-utopias out there, but every single one of them either fails to get off the ground or collapses or goes horribly wrong shortly after they get started, which kind of puts me in mind of the whole bit with the Matrix, where the computer tries to build a perfect utopia, and then all of the humans inside of it start going off, right? That idea that a pure utopia is kind of unattainable, that it's the conflict that forces us to work together and find points of satisfaction rather than having everything be perfect.
Yeah,
It's really amusing to watch or to read the correspondence between Samuel Taylor Coleridge and Robert Southey when they were trying to create Pantasocracy, which was basically a personal utopia. They didn't have any desire to change the world. They just wanted to make their own little utopian place, which I think it happens more often than not. But their wives were like, this isn't going to be utopia for us, because if you guys are having a good time, we're going to be doing laundry. And of course, they weren't considering they were having it in North America, which was taking over somebody else's space, the indigenous peoples of North America. And then Southey decided he wanted to bring along his servants, and Coleridge is like, you have got to be kidding me. We're trying to create this equal society and you want servants. And it just goes on and on and on.
servants is a topic that's it's quite fascinating, and that's a whole other hangout for a whole other time.
I've done that one.
Like the science fiction sort of idea of the utopia is that like automation and things will free us all from drudgery, and we'll have like robot servants that we don't have to feel like we're oppressing because they're not people, and like thereby all our needs will be met by technologies.
Yeah.
and then we
Well,
go
yeah.
do whatever. So it's interesting, like, because having human servants sort of like cancels out your utopia, but that you have like robot servants, does that cancel out your utopia?
Well, I mean, I think we're in an interesting position in our current society where automation is becoming a problem, and meaning that it's difficult for people to find work of particular types. Then the question becomes, well, do they have to work? Because, I mean, you have a lot of jobs in a society that need to get done. They're attractive than others, right? But once people are not working, what are they doing? And how are they making money to get themselves to live? And then you have questions, I mean, very fascinating questions like, is minimum basic income something that would work? Happy and alive in a society where people couldn't always work and shouldn't always be expected to work. Because work is something that we laud incessantly, at least in American culture at the moment. Work is drudgery, and if it didn't work, and if there weren't a requirement to work, then how would we support people in our society? I mean, that's another whole question. I'm not convinced that. I look at oh, here's another example. WALL-E has a dystopia and a utopia, right? Where people have used up the earth and they go off in this spaceship, and it's this sort of corporate thing, but everybody's turned into a slug, and nobody has any kind of personal interconnection, which makes it very dystopian. Because there are no jobs. Like what happens when there are no jobs? But somehow I don't think that people are so inclined just to sit around and not do anything. They'd have to be.
That is the way that our culture portrays that, though. I mean, look at the societies that are in the books that you've read that have something like a universal basic income. And the people who live on just that are basically shipped over into the, lazy, stupid, unuseful group of people. And the people who choose to rise above that are the people who are the protagonists in your novel.
Right.
There's a bunch of these. And so I think our culture overvalues work for profit because it's the only way they can get people to keep doing that.
Yeah.
Because I know that if I didn't have to work to pay rent, I'd be writing.
I think there'd be a lot more art, frankly.
Yeah,
and
tons.
Even if you weren't writing or making art or gardening, not because it's a job that you want to do, but because you enjoy it, what are you really doing? Even if you were just sitting around reading a book or twiddling, watching TV or doing something that is not productive for other people, you are not doing nothing at all. You you're engaging with the world.
Yeah.
Not, socially necessarily, but you're not sitting there just breathing.
Right.
So the whole idea of what does it really mean to sit around and do nothing?
Right. We also have a lot of sort of sneaky assumptions about about the laziness of what people are doing when they're not engaging in work. Like, for example, I'm thinking about all of the cultural narratives surrounding video games and how terrible it is just to spend your entire day working on video games. I happen to know many people who spend their entire day working very productively on video games. And even the ones who are just not making them, but who are just playing them, are actually learning some very interesting skills. And I have a feeling that my son is going to end up being in YouTube entertainment. Kind of like his mom, no. but he loves to go in, he loves to narrate the interactions that occur surrounding video game scenario, right? But I think that it's clear because of YouTube and the success of people like Jacksepticeye and Markiplier that there is a huge value to people in joining into these larger scale interactions surrounding gameplay. You know, and how much more healthy is that than running wars? But anyway, yes, you were going to say something.
I don't know, I'm going to change tactics here. I'm terrible for my segues, but I'm sure you guys probably have noticed there's a lot of young adult fiction and teen fiction that have to do with this subject. And if you think, does anybody have any comments on that? I mean, my daughter just read a series called The Unwanted, where there was a stratified society. If you were unwanted, you went into this world and that was it. Nobody ever saw you. And then there was this world that didn't have much of anything. And it was the other world that you wanted to be in because there was more of the utopia because people were trying to do things.
Yeah.
So why do you think there's a lot of dystopian type fiction in young literature lately?
Lately?
And maybe like longer than that, because I've only...
Yeah, it's kind of been going for a while, and it went out of fashion. There was like a year or two ago, everybody was like, God, no more dystopias. You know, the editors are booked. We've got like these slates filled for years to come. And now it's sort of back again. I've actually seen things on Twitter where like after the election, people are like, yeah, send me your dystopias.
Yeah, you know, we really need our dystopias because we have to process here.
Yeah, and I think it shows up in young adult literature is because like a theme in young adult is sort of, you know, fighting the powers that be.
Yeah.
It's when you're most passionate about changing society, even though, you know, by the time you're 25, you're like, I need a job. You know, so it's, you know, it's maybe not an eternal theme. Like I say, it cycles, you know, at a certain point, I think editors are again going to reach saturation point. But it's one of those that sort of comes and goes. And I think it feeds into a lot of young adult concerns and issues about, you know, finding your place in society. And
Yes,
this is a way to grow a young adult character and have them literally change the world somehow. So I think that's why it shows up a lot.
Yeah.
And I think there's also a big part of that for teens, which is I don't see I inhabit reflected in the choices that I'm being given. Because like my parents were like, well, you can be a doctor or a lawyer or a nurse or a teacher. And there was no best boy or gaffer or key grip or, you know, like there are a gajillion jobs out there that don't have to do with these 6 approved lifestyles.
Yeah.
And yet children are not being told, yes, you actually can make a living putting together sound systems and breaking them down after the show. That's a thing people do. Go buy a lot of black clothing.
Well, it is true that that our cultural narratives support only a very limited number of possible life paths, and I'm not sure quite why that is, but the diversity of the options is actually a lot larger. And am I seeing that we have Deborah joining us?
Yes.
Hi, Deborah.
Yes, kind of. You know, I was really resonated to what is it Kate was saying about, you know, I grew up, I could be a doctor or a lawyer. My sister got the same thing. She wanted to skip the step and become a judge, and she didn't want to have to be a lawyer first. She ended up being an amazing artist. And, you know, nowhere on that list was science fiction writer for me. And, and now, you know, that I'm sort of well into my career, I'm looking at if I had known then, what different day job choices would I have made? Because I ended up with with skills that didn't pay very well and that kept me in a chair, which I do when I write. And now I think of things like radiology tech, which you can do part-time and which keeps you on your feet and moving and hearing people's stories and, you know, stuff like that. But again, especially when your mission in life was to change the world, and these were your options, doctor, lawyer, you know, maybe a few other things, how stifling it is.
And maybe that's part of what dystopia does, is create an overwhelming cultural narrative that says you have only these options because this is what has value and nothing else does.
I think a thing that just
I would recommend the Dirty Hand.
Sorry, I'm losing track of
Dirty Hands?
Can you put that in the chat bar?
Yeah.
The Dirty Hands episode of Battlestar Galactica.
Okay.
I think a thing that disappears in Utopia is, you know, besides the servants and the existence of servants, the necessity of servants, are all the other low influence but necessary background jobs. Best boy, gaffer, copy editor, not even the people who
Typesetter.
yes, typesetter. I actually how could I forget typesetting? That's but you know, not even the people who serve you your fast food, but the people back there in the kitchen, the ones you never see.
Yeah.
Because they're back there making burgers and answering the fire later when it screams. And the people you don't see after it's closed, who are cleaning up and preparing for the next day, or the people who open. And there are many, many more.
A friend who is an after-hours restaurant pest control guy.
Ooh.
Yeah, very interesting.
Background, invisible, necessary, supportive roles, but they are low visibility and low influence, if not necessarily as low power, with as little power as you might think. Cooks have power, not a lot in the way of authority necessarily, but they have power.
Yeah.
And those are stories we don't tell in pretty much almost any literature. I mean, we tell the stories of the pilots and the people who are in control of stuff. We don't talk about the person whose 8-hour-a-day job on the aircraft carrier is refilling the soda machine. And there are people, and that is their job.
Oh, no way. Wow.
Those things don't fill themselves.
Right.
And yet, if it doesn't get done, you can say, well, that's not a real job for a real human being. But if it doesn't get done, how fast do people complain and how loud?
Exactly. Those fly boys come. What? Go ahead.
No, you have these sort of strata in a way, and feel like you're constructing a utopia if you have control over the surface level or the main cultural narrative and the jobs, etc., that lie within that main cultural narrative. And if everything within that story is going great, then you can feel like you're creating a dystopia, a utopia, but there's so much that can't be encapsulated in that. And so you've always got margins and you've always got underbellies. You know what I mean? Like, if you really try hard enough, you can find an underbelly basically anywhere. Groups tend to fracture and diversify. That's just what they do. So they're always, I don't know. I mean, have you seen scenarios in fiction, I suppose, where have diversity as a built-in condition that is recognized and made meaningful in systematic ways?
It depends on what you mean by diversity. The Dispossessed is a lovely idea of what a socialist utopia is supposed to look like. And she did such a great job of pointing out that, you know, if you are part of the behavioral diversity or mental diversity in ways that the society doesn't value, this is still not your utopia.
Right.
So it's what does society value, and that is a critical part. Whether it's racial diversity or religious diversity or neurodiversity, and do you have to be a contributing member of society? What does that mean?
Yeah.
If you are not counted as a contributing member of society, you're not contributing to the utopia, and you won't be allowed to help define it or participate.
Well, it's an interesting question because lots of people are contributing to society, right? But many of the contributions that people make are not recognized as legitimate or valued contribution. And I'm thinking in particular of the economics book about who made Adam Smith's Lunch, I think it's called. Basically, Adam Smith had this big theory of economics that was really fantastic and all that, except that he didn't really think about the labor that was being done by women at all.
Yep.
Right. And so you have these people who are contributing to society, but their contributions are not recognized. They're not rewarded monetarily or with cultural capital. And so would a utopia ideally be a place where everybody's contributions were valued, and then how would that work? It's an interesting question to try to grapple with, I guess.
I think it is because we've done it poorly, or at least the stuff I've read has done it poorly. Like Robert Heinlein, Starship Troopers is sort of a utopia, but what they don't acknowledge is that you don't get to go fight your exciting war without all these people at home having sex and providing you cannon fodder.
Right. And sending off their children in mourning and all that.
Yep, supply and demand is a thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I know that in the US we have not figured out how to value everybody's input.
Yeah.
Equally.
Yeah.
That's just not anything we do. So it doesn't surprise me that it doesn't come out in our literature because we don't know how to do that.
Right. Yeah.
That would also, I think, in some ways be like a massive book. I mean, you sort of, when you start a book, you pick your focus, and that leaves a lot of gaps.
Mm-hmm. And I think there are a lot of assumptions about a lot of assumptions and a lot of very, very elaborate narratives constructed around the idea. People have this basic need to put other people down so that they can get ahead, and it must be a result of natural selection, and like it all, like the evolutionary psychology people who have all these narratives that say, well, this is just the way nature is, and yet, human societies are not exclusively competitive. They wouldn't function if they didn't have a lot of cohesion and altruism and that sort of thing. Well, I think okay, so Patsy's asking if there's value in trying to write an actual utopia. Sure there is. I mean, exploring what our options are for making everybody's lives better, I think there's a lot of value there. Yeah, let's take a step back and take a look and see if we can conceptualize some way to get out of the cycle of marginalization and pushing people down and thinking that that's necessary in order for people. Well, it's hard to say.
What does it take to convince people that life is not a zero-sum game?
Yeah.
Oh,
That
that's
is
interesting.
a part of it. That is the I have to put you down so that I feel better,
Yeah.
or I have to keep you from getting something because if you get it, I don't.
Yeah.
I think that is. That
Or
would be a
if
good set.
everyone gets it, it's no longer valuable.
Right. Yeah, that too. That too.
Oh my God.
I've got lots of notes today.
When did rarity become so valuable just for its own sake?
Well, we've got all these laws of supply and demand, right? But on some level, perhaps it would be better if people had things that they could count on, that would be valuable, but that you should be able to just count on everybody having.
I mean, food is not valuable because it's rare. Food is valuable because it serves a purpose. It keeps you alive.
Right.
And it's also valuable because a lot of work goes into making it. So even though farmers get paid pretty crappily. But it's
Well, there's
I
value.
think
Sorry, go ahead.
well, it's like nobody has just really sort of come up with like a money alternative.
Yeah, I sometimes I play around in my head with the idea of, what would an altruism-based society look like? But altruism has its own pitfalls because it's very easy if you are giving a lot to others to overextend yourself. I think what I'm getting to is when we think about utopias, we think, well, maybe people don't write about utopias because there's nothing to write about. There's no conflict, there's no questioning. But in fact, I think it would be very interesting to take a look at, well, there's a utopia, what's required to maintain it? That's a lot of what Star Trek is doing is how do we maintain it? How do we is including everybody? I think the Prime Directive is actually one of the interesting questions of Star Trek, and I think it has something to do with there is this question of, well, if we have a utopia, wouldn't we just want to give it to everybody? And the Prime Directive kind of keeps them from attempting to do that. And in fact, Larry Justice, those folks think they have a utopia in a lot of ways, and benefit equals justice equals it's really interesting. But of course, in order to extend that benefit to the universe, they're millions of people and enslaving them to ships. And so not everybody defines happiness the same way. And how would a utopia actually accommodate that? In a way, there are costs to existing within society, and you have to be willing to pay those in order to be included in society, right? But if the society is the only option you have, then whether you're willing to pay those or not is sort of problematic. Be willing to pay them, but you may have to pay them anyway.
And you may not know what you need. Something that got brought up in a thread yesterday by Marguerite Reed, who is also at a con this weekend, was how many of you have studied economics?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you even know how to write about what a just economic system would be? It's called the dismal science for a reason. And we had another discussion about this the other day that I started, which was, actually she started the discussion, which was, what do we need to see in science fiction? And a bunch of people said non-carbon based life forms. And I just went, hold on a second. How many of us are chemists? Do you understand what is required to write about that? And I do have a couple of friends who are chemists, and we went through it and realized that non-carbon based life forms are really chemically unlikely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you'd have to do it really, really well. And it's one of the reasons people don't do it, because they can't do it well.
Right. Right. I mean, because we're not all. I mean, hey, well, look, Adam Smith is supposed to be like this amazing guy, and yet he like missed this huge piece of reality, right?
It's because she was always there
the
making
ultimate
his lunch.
economist, and he still had a really big blind spot. So, I mean, problem being a writer is you can't grasp, or I mean, you have to try, but you can't. You can't know everything about everything.
Yeah.
So you just have to kind of do your best. Gesturing at it, though, I think is valuable.
Well, when Chase said, okay, it's going to be this huge, large novel, I was like, okay, but who's writing flash fiction in those gaps? Because you don't have to explain.
Yeah.
And there's a real power in not info dumping.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is a certain realism to not info dumping too. I mean, because immersion experiences are actually quite valuable, and we are able to grasp a lot more complexity subconsciously than we are able to grasp it consciously. And in fact, I think we're all, as writers, we're more able to put complexity on the page unconsciously than we are able to do it consciously. So info dumping is, and yet problematic in many ways.
Yeah.
I think
So we need a new economic system. We need a new value system.
Let's start over.
Yeah. Well,
but I mean,
and my question is, do we need new people?
But it's not always just a info dump. It's also, for instance, I'm doing DNA analysis in the stories I'm writing right now. Well, I'm going to go visit this week a geneticist in a DNA lab, and in the end, maybe 0.2% of what I study gets on the page, but I have to be able to see in my head the story unfold, and there's too many gray places in my description of a lab.
Yeah.
So I have to go really see one, and yet there's going to be story there, but it's going to be the science is going to be right, what's in there, but it's not going to be info dumped hugely. I'm going to choose the least scientific character to be the point of view character, so I can avoid that.
Actually, I was just thinking of another really interesting dystopia and utopian story, which is Below the Root by Zilpha Keatley Snyder. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that, but it stuck out in my head because you've got this wonderful society of humans who decided they were going to start over and create the perfect society, and ended up on this planet where they have very low gravity, so people wear these suits, and they can sort of glide through the trees, and it's so cool. But what they've done is they've taken all their dissidents and they've imprisoned them under the ground. And that's a really great one. So I'm going to write it.
A literal metaphor of falling through the cracks.
That part. Sorry?
That is part of a trilogy, just so people know. The Green Sky trilogy, that's book 1.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I haven't read it. Google is your friend.
I read all 3 of them. And I have a warning, and it's really good.
I kind of want to open a little can of worms here. It's a big one. So we're not gonna have time for a
can of worms.
but there's I think there's also this idea in Western society of people go look at Amazon tribes and say, oh, they're so perfect, they have this wonderful perfect society, they all cooperate, everybody, the noble savage living at one with nature in the jungles, and we have this idea that also is a utopia.
Yeah, you're right about
that as well. We're that sort of idea shows up because, oh, look at them, they don't have money, they don't have TVs, they don't have cars, and they're all so happy.
They
What
don't
are
have
we doing
anything,
wrong?
but they work 25 hours a day trying to survive.
Yeah, nobody really points that one out. But
Well, and I mean,
Give me my sugar and my heart attacks.
completely different, right? I think that many people underestimate the influence of culture and the depth of the differences that culture can that can exist in culture. We can create massive edifices in our imagination, and so we should be able to accept that there are these massive edifices out there that have been created by communities, and they're not unreal. But yeah, so it is quite fascinating. Look, guys, we are in the last minute here, so I want to thank you all for coming. This was an adventure, and I want to thank Marjorie for being here, because Marjorie and Kimberly are being here at BayCon and helping us have a good discussion. But you know what? I was really glad that all of you guys could make it online. And thank you, Kate, for coming from WisCon, and thank you, Deborah, who left BayCon last night.
That's not recovered yet.
Going home and then showing up again. Wait, it was great to have you all here. I'm thinking we're going to probably meet again this week about servants, because I really like that topic. On Wednesday. My husband is reading a book called Servants right now, so I'm going to have lots of little anecdotes to share with you.
I'm doing actual research on butlers and buttling. But that's because I wanted to be a butler when I was a kid.
I can tell that you're going to have a lot to say on Wednesday. You all for being here. This was really great. I have a ton of notes that I'm going to write up, and I'm going to stop the broadcast. All right.